Deadly heart attack symptoms in women over 60. The silent dangers 90% ignore. Have you ever heard the story of a woman in her 60s, sitting peacefully with her grandchildren over a cup of tea, only to pass away just a few hours later from a heart attack without ever having experienced a single episode of chest pain? Can you believe that many women do not collapse to the floor or cry out for help like we so often see in movies, but instead silently leave this world in their sleep? The shocking truth is this. In postmenopausal women, the heart often does not sound the alarm with severe, crushing chest pain. Instead, it sends out faint signals, so subtle that nearly 90% of people ignore them. Sometimes it is nothing more than a lingering fatigue lasting several days, a fleeting wave of nausea, or a dull pressure in the back or neck. Have you ever told yourself, it must just be aging? Maybe the weather is changing. It will pass. But what if those were the final cries for help from your heart? I have met patients who swore they never imagined they were about to suffer a heart attack. They still went to the market, still tidied up the house, still laughed with their grandchildren, until suddenly they never woke up again. Does that sound familiar? Perhaps you have even seen that very image in your own family. And the most frightening question is, are we, right now, overlooking those same signs in our own bodies? In the next few minutes, I will take you through 8 silent but deadly warning signs that women over the age of 60 often experience before a heart attack strikes. One of them, often mistaken for nothing more than a stomach issue, has been the very reason thousands of women have passed away without ever getting the chance to say goodbye. Can you guess what it is? Let's begin with the very first symptom.
Symptom 1. Unusual, overwhelming fatigue. Have you ever felt so exhausted that even the simplest tasks, like walking from the bedroom to the kitchen or folding a few clothes, felt almost impossible, even though you hadn't done anything strenuous the day before? Do you sometimes think to yourself, it's just because I'm getting older, my strength is fading? In reality, this could be one of the very first signals your heart is sending you. In a study published in the journal Circulation, more than 70% of women who later experienced a heart attack reported that they had been unusually fatigued for several weeks beforehand. The troubling part is that most of them dismissed it, believing that tiredness was just a natural part of aging. But think about it carefully. Does aging alone usually make you so weak that you cannot even stand steadily or force you to sit down and rest, even when you have hardly done anything at all? I once heard a patient recall that one morning she simply intended to water a few flower pots. But after holding the watering can for just a short while, she suddenly felt her body give way, her heart racing, and she was forced to sit down and gasp for breath. She thought it must have been due to lack of sleep. Only 2 days later, she was hospitalized for an acute heart attack. Do you see how such a small misunderstanding nearly cost her life? The critical difference is this. Fatigue caused by the heart does not improve even when you rest. It lingers and comes back again and again. If this condition is accompanied by slight shortness of breath, nausea, or dizziness, then it is no longer just ordinary tiredness. So what other symptom is just as easy to dismiss, yet in reality is a warning bell from the heart? It is that subtle tightness in the chest, something many people mistake for a tight blouse or simple indigestion. Have you ever experienced it yourself?
Symptom 2. Brief chest tightness or pressure. Have you ever felt as though a heavy object was pressing down on your chest, or like a band was tightening across the upper part of your body, only for it to disappear after a few minutes? Did you assume it was just fatigue, a muscle strain, or perhaps a bra that was too tight? If you have ever thought this way, you are not alone. Many women over 60 have overlooked this very sign until they were admitted to the hospital for a real heart attack. What makes this symptom dangerous is that it does not resemble the dramatic, crushing chest pain we so often see portrayed on television. Instead, it is only a fleeting pressure, sometimes accompanied by a slight burning sensation or mild shortness of breath. In a study published in JAMA Internal Medicine, doctors observed that women with acute coronary syndrome often describe this feeling more frequently than men, and the majority confused it with digestive issues or ordinary fatigue. I once met a patient who told me that one morning, while driving, she suddenly felt a heaviness in her chest that lasted just a few minutes. She took a deep breath and thought it must have been stress. Yet only a few hours later, she had to call emergency services for a heart attack. Isn't it terrifying that such a brief signal could foreshadow a deadly event? What makes everything even more complicated is that after menopause, the drop in estrogen levels makes the blood vessels more sensitive and vulnerable. Yet women often hesitate, convincing themselves that a little rest will fix it. But the next time that tight band around the chest does not go away, will there still be time? Even more frightening, some warning signs do not appear in the chest at all, but radiate upward into the neck, downward into the jaw, or across the left shoulder, leading many to believe they are only dealing with a muscle strain or a bad sleeping posture. Have you ever felt something like this yourself?
Symptom 3. Pain in the neck, jaw, or left shoulder. Have you ever woken up with a dull ache in your neck or jaw and assumed you simply slept in the wrong position? Or perhaps your left shoulder suddenly felt heavy, as if you had been carrying something weighty, even though in reality you hadn't done any hard labor at all. If you have ever experienced this, did you ever consider that it could actually be a signal from your heart rather than just a problem with your muscles or joints? In an analysis published in JAMA Internal Medicine, researchers discovered that women with acute coronary syndrome often described pain in the neck, jaw, or shoulder more frequently than men. This makes the symptom highly misleading, because most people believe it will disappear after a massage or a bit of rest. But think about it. If that pain lingers for several days, or comes with fatigue and slight shortness of breath, can we really afford to dismiss it so easily? One of my patients once told me that she used a hot compress on her shoulder for 3 straight days, convinced she was just suffering from a muscle strain. But when dizziness and nausea began to accompany the pain, she finally went to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her as being in the middle of a heart attack. Do you see how razor-thin the line can be between what seems like ordinary muscle pain and a deadly warning sign? What makes this even more concerning is that such pain does not always follow the same pattern. Sometimes it begins in the chest and radiates to the neck and jaw, while other times it starts as a dull ache in the left shoulder and slowly spreads down the arm. It is precisely this unpredictability that causes many women to overlook it. But did you know that there is another symptom even easier to misinterpret? Not pain, but a feeling of breathlessness, of not being able to take in enough air even when you are doing the lightest of activities. Have you ever experienced that moment?
Symptom 4. Shortness of breath or shallow breathing. Have you ever found yourself needing to stop in the middle of a very simple task, like folding clothes, watering the plants, or just walking a few steps around the house, because of a sudden feeling that you couldn't catch your breath, as if you weren't getting enough air? Did you think it was just due to aging or perhaps a temporary spell of fatigue? But if this sensation repeats itself over and over, it may well be a sign that your heart is in serious trouble. In research conducted by the American Heart Association, more than 58% of women who had heart attacks reported experiencing shortness of breath for days or even weeks before the event. The tragic part is that most of them believed they were dealing with something like the flu, anemia, or simply stress. Isn't it frightening when one of the clearest signals from the body can be so easily ignored? I remember a 63-year-old patient who told me, "That day I was cooking as usual, and suddenly I had to grab the table because I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding. I thought it was just because the weather was too hot. But only a few hours later, I was in the emergency room." Can you imagine her fear when just a few short breaths became the difference between life and death? Unlike ordinary fatigue, shortness of breath caused by heart disease can appear even when you are resting or just waking up. If it is accompanied by dizziness, palpitations, or nausea, then it is a warning bell that must not be ignored. But what is even more frightening is that some symptoms have nothing to do with breathing or the chest at all, but instead show up in the stomach. Many women thought they were suffering from simple digestive issues, while in reality their heart was crying out for help. Have you ever had nausea, bloating, or persistent belching without finding a clear cause?
Symptom 5. Persistent nausea, bloating, or belching. Have you ever felt bloated, nauseous, or had prolonged acid reflux after dinner and quickly dismissed it by thinking, "It must be something I ate, maybe my stomach is weaker now"? How many times have you reassured yourself like that, taken a few antacids, only to wake up the next morning with the exact same problem? If that sounds familiar, you need to pause and ask yourself, is this really my stomach, or is my heart speaking out? In a U.S. study, many women hospitalized for heart attacks reported experiencing several days of nausea and bloating beforehand, yet never felt any chest pain. Some even went out and bought digestive medicine until suddenly they collapsed and were diagnosed with a true heart attack. Do you see how dangerous this kind of confusion can be? Doctors at the Cleveland Clinic have also warned that sometimes the digestive system is the very first place to show signs when the heart is failing to pump blood efficiently. That feeling of heaviness in the stomach, continuous belching, or persistent nausea, especially when combined with unusual fatigue, can be one of the earliest warnings from the heart. Have you ever experienced this and brushed it off, thinking it was just indigestion? What is most alarming is that many postmenopausal women tend to dismiss these symptoms, assuming they are merely the result of hormonal changes or irregular eating habits. But the next time you experience prolonged nausea without any clear cause, remember, it may not be your stomach at all, but a desperate cry for help from your heart. And there is another symptom that can appear just as suddenly. You may be sitting still, doing nothing, when your entire body suddenly turns cold and clammy, drenched in sweat. Are you sure that is only from the heat, or just a fleeting moment of anxiety?
Symptom 6. Cold sweats without a clear reason. Have you ever been sitting still, barely moving, when suddenly your whole body turned cold, drenched in sweat as if you had just gone for a run, your clothes soaked through, even though the room around you was perfectly cool? Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night to find your shirt clinging to your back, drenched in sweat, without any explanation? If so, did you think it was just aging, stress, or perhaps too much internal heat? In reality, according to the American Heart Association, unexplained cold sweats are one of the silent warning signs of a heart attack, especially in women and older adults. This is not the sweat that comes from exercise or hot weather, but rather the body's emergency response when blood flow to the heart becomes blocked. Do you see the stark difference? I remember a woman in her 60s telling me that one evening while watching TV, she suddenly felt her hands and feet trembling, her body breaking into a cold sweat.
She thought it was just low blood sugar and went to grab something sweet to eat. But only an hour later, she was rushed to the hospital with a heart attack. You see, what seemed like a harmless reaction turned out to be the thin line between life and death. What makes this symptom even more frightening is that it often comes together with dizziness, nausea, or exhaustion. Yet many women convince themselves that a little rest will make it better. Have you ever told yourself that instead of getting checked immediately? Even more dangerous, some women not only break out in cold sweats, but also suddenly feel their heart racing, pounding heavily, overwhelmed by an intense wave of anxiety, almost like an inexplicable panic attack.
Symptom 7. Sudden, unexplained anxiety or panic. Have you ever been sitting on an otherwise normal day with nothing stressful happening when suddenly your heart began to race, your palms grew sweaty, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over you, as if something terrible was about to occur? Did you reassure yourself that it was just stress or a brief moment of age-related anxiety? But what if the real source of that panic was your heart? Studies on gender differences in acute coronary syndrome have shown that women often report more emotional and neurological symptoms than men, including anxiety, palpitations, and a sudden, inexplicable sense of fear. In fact, this may be the brain's way of reacting when blood flow drops in the very first minutes of a heart attack. Isn't it terrifying to think that a simple rush of anxiety could actually be a deadly sign? One of my patients told me that she was at home reading when she suddenly felt her heart racing, her body breaking out in cold sweats, and a wave of panic rising inside her that she simply couldn't explain. No chest pain, no obvious shortness of breath, just a strong sense that something was very wrong. She almost called her daughter to take her to the hospital, but then thought, maybe I'm just overreacting. The very next day, she was admitted with a heart attack. Have you ever caught yourself thinking the same way? The most dangerous part is that women often blame themselves, thinking it is merely a psychological issue, instead of trusting their intuition. But sometimes the heart sends its warnings precisely through these waves of anxiety. Would you still dare to ignore such unusual panic again? And then there is an even more sneaky symptom. It often shows up in the middle of the night, waking you at 2 or 3 a.m. with a heavy chest or overwhelming fatigue. Have you ever experienced that?
Symptom 8. Trouble sleeping or waking up at night due to exhaustion. Have you ever jolted awake at 2 or 3 a.m., your body drained, your heart racing, gasping for breath, as if you had just run a marathon, even though you had been sleeping peacefully just moments before? Did you assume it was simply insomnia from aging or the result of too much worry? But what if, in reality, it was your heart trying to send you a signal? In a study published in Circulation, nearly 48% of women who later suffered heart attacks reported experiencing sleep disturbances in the weeks before the event, often waking in the night with fatigue or a suffocating feeling. Sadly, most dismissed it, believing it was just stress or blaming it on menopausal hormone changes. Does this sound familiar to you, thinking that one sleepless night is nothing serious? One of my patients told me that she frequently woke up around 3 a.m. with the sensation that something heavy was pressing down on her chest. It was uncomfortable, though not sharply painful. She assumed it was because she had eaten dinner too late or simply a part of aging. It was only when shortness of breath and nausea began to accompany these episodes that she finally went for a checkup. By then, doctors discovered she had already experienced a silent heart attack. Can you imagine how dangerous such hesitation can be? The truth is, sleep is when the heart most needs its rest. If even in your sleep your body cannot remain at ease, then that is a signal you cannot afford to ignore.
Would you still dare to think it is just insomnia when this happens over and over again? And more importantly, what happens when all these symptoms, unusual fatigue, fleeting chest tightness, nausea, and sleepless nights, begin to appear together? Could that be the heart's final cry for help before it is too late?
When 2 or 3 small symptoms appear together, stop for a moment and think about this. You have now heard about 8 warning signs: unusual fatigue, fleeting chest tightness, pain in the neck or shoulder, shortness of breath, nausea, cold sweats, unexplained anxiety, and waking in the night with exhaustion. Have you ever experienced at least one of them? Perhaps you dismissed it as just an ordinary thing. But do you know what is truly frightening? It is when 2 or 3 of these seemingly minor signs occur at the same time. In a well-known study published in JAMA, doctors found that heart attack patients who did not experience chest pain had an in-hospital mortality rate of 23.3%, twice as high as those who presented with classic chest pain. And the majority of this no chest pain group were older women. Do you see the cruel irony that the very people without the obvious symptoms were the ones most likely to die? Another striking finding comes from the study by McSweeney and colleagues. 70% of women reported unusual fatigue weeks before their heart attack. 47.8% experienced sleep disturbances, 42% reported shortness of breath, and 39% had digestive issues. Imagine this: you feel unusually tired, you cannot sleep, and you have a little nausea, all within a few days. Would you still think it's just aging? Or would you wonder, is my heart crying for help? I remember one patient who told me, if my husband hadn't forced me to go to the emergency room that day, I might not be here to tell this story. She only felt slight chest pressure, combined with fatigue and mild nausea. No dramatic chest pain, no collapse. Yet the doctors confirmed she had been in the middle of a silent heart attack. Doesn't it make you shudder to realize that just 3 small signs, when combined, nearly cost her life? The danger of so-called silent heart attacks lies in their vagueness. They trick us into underestimating them. And because women so often put their families first, they are more likely to neglect themselves. But do you think the heart will forgive such hesitation? The truth is, recognizing these signals early not only saves your life in the moment, but also prevents your heart from suffering long-term damage. The question is, will you take action as soon as 2 or 3 symptoms appear together, or will you wait until it is too late? So what can we do to prevent this? To ensure that women over 60 do not quietly slip away in their sleep? And what practical steps can you begin today?
You see, heart attacks in women over 60 are not loud or dramatic like in the movies. They're quiet, patient, knocking on the door with symptoms that seem harmless: a wave of exhaustion, a restless night, a sudden spell of nausea. And when we hesitate, when we reassure ourselves, it's probably nothing, that is when too many women leave this world in their sleep. Do you want yourself or someone you love to become one of them? The good news is that we can absolutely prevent and detect these problems early. The simplest step you can take today is to schedule regular heart checkups, monitor your blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar, and if possible, ask your doctor about a coronary artery calcium scan. Do you remember the last time you had your heart thoroughly checked? Second, nourish your heart every day with small habits. Take a brisk 30-minute walk, eat plenty of green vegetables, and limit salt and sugar. And don't forget one factor that is extremely important but rarely mentioned: managing stress.
because the heart does not only grow weary with age, it also tires from the silent worries we carry inside. Are you giving yourself enough rest and allowing yourself to enjoy life's small joys each day? Finally, listen closely to your body. If you feel that something is not quite right, don't ignore it. Your intuition may be the very alarm bell that saves your life. If this video has helped you discover something new, share it with your mother, your sister, your closest friend, because you never know, you might be the one to save a heart in need. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue walking together on this journey of protecting your health. Because your heart deserves to be heard and cared for every single day.